In September 1994, the small rural town of Ruwa, Zimbabwe was forever changed. For several days, people across the region reported seeing mysterious lights in the sky at night, kicking off rumors and speculation about UFO activity in the area. But while these sightings could have been attributed to any number of things, they were just precursors to one of the strangest episodes in recent history. Around 10 a.m. on the morning of September 16, 1994, children at the Ariel school went outside for a mid-morning break while their teachers were in a meeting. It was a seemingly normal day, until the children noticed something strange come out of the sky and land in a nearby field. When the 62 children who witnessed the event were later interviewed, they all gave some variation of the same story. Each of them had seen at least one silver disc, possibly more, land in a small circle of trees, and from the disc emerged several quote-unquote men, dressed all in black with large dark eyes, small slit mouths, and odd pale skin. The strange beings communicated with the children, but their mouths never moved. Rather, they spoke to the children with their minds, showing them visions of an apocalyptic Earth, warning the children of the future repercussions of Earth's continuing industrialization and environmental devastation. In a panic, the children told their teachers what they had just witnessed, but the teachers chalked it up to nonsense or a prefabricated story and continued on as normal. Then the children went home and told their parents. The next day, the school was bombarded with calls from concerned parents demanding to know why their children had returned home in such distress. Eventually, the story was reported by ZBC Radio, gaining the attention of UFO researcher Cynthia Hind and the BBC Zimbabwe correspondent Tim Leach. Leach interviewed the Ariel school children on September 19th, 3 days after the incident, and Cynthia Hind interviewed them the following day on the 20th. Both rounds of interviews garnered some truly shocking responses so shocking that they attracted the attention of a Harvard psychology professor named John Mack, who had taken a deep interest in various UFO phenomena. At the risk of tarnishing his own career, Mack interviewed the children of the Ariel school and, much to the chagrin of his colleagues and the deans of Harvard, Mack wholeheartedly believed the students. It's not mentioned as often as Roswell, the Phoenix Lights, or speculation about ancient aliens, but the Ariel school UFO incident is considered by no less an authority than the BBC to be, quote, one of the most significant events in UFO history, and for good reason. You're listening to History Uncovered, brought to you by the digital publisher All That's Interesting, where we explore the uncharted corners of the natural world and the world past. I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Austin Harvey.
And I'm All That's Interesting staff writer Kalina Fraga.
And this week, we are diving into the story of the Ariel School UFO incident, perhaps one of the most convincing UFO cases in history.
It is a convincing one from a certain angle.
Yeah,
we'll get into it.
We'll get into it. But I have my reasons for why I think it's fairly credible.
Mm-hmm. All right.
The day was September 14th. I'm gonna serial it.
Oh yeah, do it.
Yeah, the day was September 4th. Shit. Oh, now I have all this pressure.
No.
I gave up on that really quickly. Yes, in September 1994. 62 children at the Ariel school in Ruwa, Zimbabwe, reported to their teachers and their parents they saw one or possibly more silver discs land in a nearby field. The interesting thing being that it's convenient in a sense. All of the adults at the school, except for like basically the lunch lady, were at a meeting at the time. So there wasn't really any adult there to corroborate what the children said they saw.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, weirdly convenient, but
the aliens chose their time well.
Yeah, apparently, yeah. But kind of mentioned it last time, but to reiterate the point, this is a small rural community with very limited access to modern advancements at the time, meaning a lot of the children didn't have any televisions at home. They weren't into pop culture and the like UFO zeitgeist in the same way that like American people were. So whereas somebody like in Lake Michigan would see a light in the sky and think an alien, these kids, a lot of them didn't quite know what they were looking at. And again, harkens back to like the Kelly Hopkinsville incident. So the children said they saw these discs land in a field nearby the school. And there's a map online of the layout of this school. And so you can see where they said they saw this land. It was basically just like on the other side of a fence.
I can't remember if that's in the article on the site or not.
I think it is. Regardless, it's very easily findable, if not on our website. But a lot of the kids who later told their teachers about this said that what they thought were these things called Zivakwambo, which are evil goblins of local folklore for the Shona and Ndebele people. So the children reported this to their teachers after recess, and the teachers kind of naturally thought that they were making everything up.
Yeah.
That they were just telling a story.
So they're young children. They're not like 17.
They're like 5 to 12.
Yeah.
They're very young. Yeah. So they went about the day like normal. And then all of a sudden that night, the school started getting a bunch of calls from concerned parents. Like, why did my kid just come home absolutely terrified?
Yeah.
Telling me this wild story.
Right.
I mean, worst case scenario, aliens have just visited your children's school. Maybe that might not even be worst case scenario. That's just like, that's like, you're not even thinking about that. Like worst case scenario, a pedophile just visited your child's school. Right? I mean, they're like, hey, I saw this weird man outside my school dressed all in black. And
yeah, I think we should mention that this school is like a really prestigious school. So like, these are the kind of parents who are going to get involved in their children's lives. Right.
And the kind of school who's going to be very concerned if parents are threatening to pull their children out of school because now they're losing tuition money. So there is like a threat for the school to like, kind of figure out what's going on. Eventually news spread of what the children basically saying, yeah, we saw flying saucers land and weird plasticky looking gray men come out dressed all in black with big black eyes and small mouths and large heads that were only a few feet tall. Very classic alien gray.
It's interesting that we mentioned 2 episodes ago in Kelly Hopkinsville, but that they're gray aliens, which is what they were in Kentucky in the 50s.
Right.
Green.
Right. Which I think is another to the point of credibility in the favor of the children. If they were saying we saw little green men, it might have just been a story that they heard.
Right.
But they were very specific and distinct about saying that these men that they were little men about a meter tall, dressed in black, shiny suits with long black hair and elongated eyes.
Creepy.
So
yeah.
But eventually, news of this spread. The story is initially told on ZBC radio, and then it reached the BBC, who asked their Zimbabwe correspondent, Tim Leach, to go to the school and interview the children about what they saw.
This, like, it kind of reminds me of the exploding whale. And, like, this reporter, he's like, can you go check this out? And I'm sure the guy was like, oh, my God, okay. But then he, like, has a interesting experience, the whole story.
The stories they told him are so, like, uniquely bizarre to this case. They talk about seeing the little men moving in slow motion and running towards them and then suddenly being like 5 to 10 meters back as if they were just kind of like jumping around in their perception. The one girl described being afraid of the men, and when asked why, she said it's because he had evil eyes, which is just like unnerving to begin with. And then they expanded on that. They said, what about their eyes was evil? And a few of the children who looked into the eyes of these men said that I'm just going to say aliens. The aliens spoke to them, but never moved their mouths. They spoke to them telepathically. Yeah. Yeah. With very like strange, prescient messages that I don't think 5 to 12-year-old children would necessarily be focusing on. Yeah. The one kid said that the men warned them that the earth is becoming too technologized and that pollution mustn't be. Yeah. It's crazy. Other kids described like seeing in their heads basically like apocalyptic versions of the earth on fire.
That's so different from what we've discussed so far, is like aliens interacting with people.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
And allegedly warning them about future environmental disasters if we continue on the path we're going on.
Yeah, right. Definitely. I'm trying to think of like what kids would know about the environment, or if there were any like incidences that they might have.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible that they were being taught about pollution and the environment in school.
Yeah, it's
like
possible.
maybe even some of the older kids, and then the younger kids were like, oh yeah, but it's just like, well, I will kind of get into that a little bit later too. One of the people who ends up becoming involved in this, John Mack, professor of psychiatry at Harvard, visited the school. Apparently John Mack had some strong opinions about the environment.
To put it lightly, yes.
Yeah, so it's skeptics of this have said it's possible the children picked up some of these conservationist ideas from John Mack.
Well,
and
because
incorporated into the story. Before
John Mack showed up, I don't think they told the story about the aliens speaking to them.
No, that was at a later interview.
Yeah.
But with Tim Leach, they explained that they saw men come out, and the BBC has this footage released. The children describe seeing the saucers. They describe these things with big eyes. Evidently, I mean, what they said must have been disarming, because Tim Leach later spoke about it and said, I could handle war zones, but I could not handle this.
Yeah. I mean, when children speak, especially when they're telling the same story, that must feel, unlike adults, they don't have anything to gain, you know.
Right.
They're not looking to pull a prank, probably. It must feel like honest from young children like this.
And it might have been one thing, like when they initially spoke to their teachers and said this thing happened, that could have been dismissed as a prank. But then to go home to like different families and to share the same story, and then again enough to the point that parents were concerned about like, hey,
right,
why is my kid freaking out right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that you could say they were taking the joke too far, but if you're pulling a joke on your teacher, I don't know why you would mention it.
Yeah, I think there's also an argument like
well.
This gets back to what we talked about with like mass hysteria. But when you're a kid and you're like 7 and someone says, oh my God, I saw this thing, I think it's pretty easy for you to be like, oh, I believe that. And I think I saw it too. I don't know.
Right.
I think children are pretty impressionable.
They're impressionable, yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. So I can see how that could have spread amongst them. But there were a lot of, there was 62 kids, right?
62 children.
Yeah.
Who said they saw this. So eventually, yeah. So after that initial BBC interview, this woman, Cynthia Hind, caught wind of what was going on. She was much more inclined to believe in UFO stuff. That was kind of like her whole thing. She had a newsletter.
Yeah. She's like professional ufologist or just
UFO. They call her a UFO expert repeatedly. So I don't know what the qualifications are to be a UFO expert, but it was a thing that she wrote about often, looked into, very much believed. She also went to the school to interview the children.
Yeah.
And this is where they started doing some of the drawings that they had.
Which are very weird, I have to say.
They're like super, I mean, they look like children's drawings, but they're all like, there's like, it's so neat. The things that the recurring motifs throughout, it's like the same patch of trees. The aliens, I mean, they look like stereotypical aliens, but like the number of them, the way the craft looks, it's all like just a little bit uncanny.
Yeah.
Some of the drawings even have like little notes written on them of like the aliens saying things.
Yeah, they're weird. I mean, I'm pretty sure some of those are in our article.
They definitely are, yeah.
Yeah, that's very strange.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and then one of those kids ended up becoming an artist as an adult, and she still paints pictures of what she saw that day, but her art skills are much better, so the drawings are a lot scarier.
Yeah, oh, wow. Huh.
Yeah, they're like very haunting. And like you said just a second ago too, what would these children have to gain from telling this story? And in a lot of instances, it like ruined their lives.
Yeah.
Like, especially with that girl, her name was Emily Trim. She told her parents, and her parents were devout Catholic, or maybe not Catholics, but devout Christians. And they basically just dismissed it and said, like, that's not in the Bible. So it's not real.
Yeah.
They pulled her out of the school, moved the family back to Canada. She was never able to talk to anybody about this because people always thought she was crazy. So
That's interesting. You think she is someone growing up, coming of age, like the internet age? She might have found people online, but
but growing up in one of those like much more conservative religious homes, kind of like under lock and key. Parents are already worried about, what she said she saw.
Yeah.
So kind of the opposite of the Kelly Hopkinsville thing, where they were making money off of this encounter later. This girl was like, I would rather have that had not happened to me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's definitely a weird one. It's interesting because I think you could really easily fall into either side of this story in terms of believing it or not believing it.
Yeah, I think it's very clear which side I fall on.
I think I fall on the other side in this one.
I think, yeah. I will say, Cynthia Hind, her interviews, she interviewed the children in groups, which is not the best way to collect the story because at that point, it can become a game of telephone.
Right.
My defense of that is they also noted that the children told similar stories, but not the same story. And like the metaphor I like to use is imagine you talk to two people who are at the same concert on opposite ends of the crowd, and they're going to recall the same concert if you ask them about it. But their individual experience and perception of it might be completely different.
Right, for sure.
Because of the people surrounding them, because of their own like angle of it, whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think that's an important note that the children more or less told the same plot. They had the same, this thing landed, we saw it, this person talked to me or didn't talk to me, depending on who it was. But like the fact that there was no general consensus on whether one craft landed or multiple craft, how many men came out. Some of the drawings, the men don't have hair, some of them they do. So there's like little inconsistencies that indicates that the children aren't just telling completely different stories.
Yeah.
But they're not just sharing the same story that they all collectively like decided on together.
Right. I think that's a fair point because if their stories were too similar, that would feel
right. Like
suspicious.
Scripted, rehearsed.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, John Mack, I mentioned earlier, he's a professor of psychiatry at Harvard. Previously had won a Pulitzer Prize for his 1977 study, Lawrence of Arabia, A Prince of Our Disorder, The Life of T.E. Lawrence. But beginning in the early 90s, John Mack took a very, very deep interest in talking with people who claimed they had been abducted by UFOs. He published a book earlier that year in 1994, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, and Harvard actually conducted an investigation with the deans and a group of Mack's peers because he was lending credence to these stories.
Right. To a patient.
Right.
Yeah.
They basically wanted him to tell the patient that they wanted him to diagnose him with something, whether it was schizophrenia, whether it was some other psychological disorder. And the same thing happened when he talked to the children at the Ariel school. The Harvard deans basically wanted him to say mass hysteria, but he didn't.
Yeah.
He believed what these children were telling him. And they were the ones, or he was the one that they mentioned a telepathic communication to.
Right. Interesting.
He also was on his way somewhere else in Zimbabwe at the time this story broke to interview like a medicine man who claimed to have been abducted by aliens.
Oh,
and rerouted his trip to come to the Ariel school to talk to the children.
Yeah. Seems like a bigger story. Makes sense.
Yeah. So again, it's another one of those things. It's like you could argue he had something to gain because he was writing about it.
Yeah.
And obviously would sell books. But he was also already a successful man, a Harvard psychologist. I mean, that's a huge achievement. He'd won a Pulitzer Prize. It's not like he needed to put his name on the map. It was already there.
Right. But I mean, he and Cynthia Hind are both like believers going into this, believing it.
True. Which they definitely have a bias. I'm just saying I don't think he has much to gain. I'd argue he risked more by doing this than he gained from it. But that's my piece about it. That's the story. I mean, the whole event lasted like only a few minutes. The thing came down. It presumably flew away.
Yeah, presumably.
Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, like I said, though, a lot of these children as adults, there was this documentary that came out earlier this year called Ariel Phenomenon that interviewed some of the kids now, especially Emily Trim. One of them was a British naval pilot who asked to remain off the record, but he said he stands by what he saw at the time. So it's not like years later people are coming out and being like, yeah, no, that didn't actually happen.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, we all made it up. I mean, granted, those interviews likely would have been left out of the documentary.
Yeah. It's probably true.
Because again, the documentary definitely has a clear bias going into it, which is a fault of the filmmaker. Or they didn't get anybody who retroactively denied it. So it's...
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like when you're that age, you're so impressionable. And if someone's like, this is what you saw, and adults are talking to you and kind of confirming this thing that was maybe a bit nebulous, you believe it more and more. And then that doesn't go away as you get older.
True. Yeah. By those last rounds of interviews with John Mack, they had already spoken about it like 3 or 4 times.
I'm sure I'm speculating a bit here, but I'm sure they started the interview saying, I believe you. These people are out there.
Yeah. I'd be more curious about those Tim Leach interviews, those initial BBC
I think he was
ones.
more of a unbiased factor in all this.
The evil eyes thing creeps me out.
Yeah. It's interesting because they didn't seem like they wanted to hurt the children based on what they allegedly telepathically said. It was more like, this is a warning for your own good.
They were delivering a message to say like, hey, stop destroying your planet.
Right. Which wasn't an evil thing to say.
Right. But I mean, imagine like I said the other episode about like I used to have nightmares about aliens being like there's just something unsettling about those big soulless black eyes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, terrifying.
And none of the kids were saying, oh, these spacemen talk to us. Like I said, like a lot of them thought they were the goblins or they didn't know. They just called them men.
Weird. I don't know. Have my doubts. Yeah.
I will also say Cynthia Hind said the children likely didn't know about UFOs or aliens or have technology at home. Ruwa really is not that far from a relatively thriving metropolis city, Harare. The kids did come from affluent families. In the days preceding that event, radio stations had been reporting on lights seen in the sky. And so there definitely was talk of, could these be UFOs? It's possible the children could have picked up on that as well.
Yes.
Yeah. John Mack was an environmental activist. So.
Right. Those lights in the sky were a satellite breaking up in the atmosphere.
Right. Right.
But at the time, people just saw it and kind of freaked out. And Cynthia Hind was very aware of that going on before this incident happened. Yeah.
Have you ever looked at Emily Trim's UFO art?
Not as an adult, I don't think, but I saw the children's art as children. Images. Oh, yeah. It's interesting because the one I'm looking at now, which is it's a painting basically of a black disc. It looks very sort of like what you would imagine aliens as like a broader cultural idea versus.
Yeah. But she definitely imbues her like current artwork with a lot more of that like dreadful feeling than a kid would be able to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there's like more emotion versus I think they were just kind of drawing. It was descriptive. It wasn't.
Right. Like this. I mean, this one kid's drawing shows like an alien in a group of trees and like a group of like stick children.
Yeah.
All with their arms up screaming. There's another one by a different student that shows the alien almost like floating and his body's covered in polka dots and it has long black hair. This one's just a black disc in a field of trees. Multiple. Yeah. I mean, all of the artwork's available on Google if you just look it up. But there is like a lot of consistency between their stuff and then, Emily Trim's current artwork, and she posted on Instagram still to this day, is much more, it's the same thematic elements that were present in all the children's artwork, but like much more disturbing and dark.
Yeah, because she must be like in her 30s or 40s now if she was like 7, let's say. Yeah. 54.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think like I said, you can look at this story from two different angles and see something different.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think each argument is equally plausible and compelling, maybe more so than a lot of UFO stories.
Well, there's a lot more going on in this story than the last two episodes we've talked about, where people saw things. I mean, I guess it has more similarity to Kelly Hopkinsville than the Lake Michigan one, except that it was adults, mostly adults in Kelly Hopkinsville,
right,
versus children, and just how much it was analyzed by adults. I think that's the interesting thing here. That is maybe what causes my skepticism. It's children said this thing, they're children, and then these adults came in, with the exception of Leach, who were very strong believers and wanted to believe and wanted this story to be a story. And how much their involvement, that's my sticking point here, I think.
Yeah, they definitely could have influenced a lot of what was said here.
Right. I mean, the two things you brought up were like, Hind interviewed the children in groups, which seems like not the best way, because you're sitting in a group of, let's say, 4. Child A says a thing. Child B hears it. I don't know. Yeah.
You don't want to be the one kid who goes, that's not true.
Yeah, that's not what happened. These weird dynamics kids have.
Yeah.
And then the fact that the kids told the story, and then Mac appears with his agenda about the environment and stuff, and then suddenly, the aliens actually spoke to us too, and they said these things that happened to align with what.
Right.
I'm like, I don't know. Like the sighting itself, I think was very strange. What happened after it, I have more questions about, I guess.
I mean, the initial BBC interviews are definitely the most compelling evidence in favor of this being a UFO incident. I mean, a lot of the stuff John Mack did was on camera. His interviews with the children were also filmed. In them, it doesn't show him saying to them anything about the environment, but obviously we don't know what was said when cameras were not rolling.
Yeah. And also, I think if you're a child and you have this story and someone, there could be like leading questions. Did it say anything to you?
Sure.
I don't know. It's possible.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the videotapes of him talking to the children, but
yeah, I have, and I watched the documentary Ariel Phenomenon. I bought it.
Oh,
it was the only way to watch it. It was only $10 though.
Wow.
It's really interesting. In that documentary, Emily Trim goes back to the Ariel school for the first time since she was a kid and witnessed this, and it's like a very big part of the story of it. Is her like trauma surrounding that event.
Yeah.
And that's another thing too, is like, if this was a made up story entirely that the children came up with, why does it have such long lasting traumatic implications for somebody?
Yeah. And you could apply that same line of thinking to Kelly Hopkinsville and like Michigan, in terms of people saw this thing, it very deeply affected them, and they never really changed their story. I mean, it affected her because she was so young and it was so traumatic.
Right.
But people like the meteorologist in Michigan and the Sutton family and Kelly, like this changed their lives, changed their perspective of things. Yeah.
And usually not for the better.
Right. Because it's a secret and it's like kind of shameful and it's not something people believe. Yeah.
Because there are definitely people who have capitalized on fake UFO stories.
Yeah.
Or even to kind of broaden the scope from fake paranormal stories, or not necessarily even fake ones, but like you look at shows like Ghost Adventures or like Ghost Hunters, or any of those like or like green and white night vision. We're investigating this haunted house and did you guys see that? And then they pull out the spirit box and it's and they're like, it said,
get out.
Yeah. Whatever it may be. The idea of taking that and turning it into like a business has definitely been done before. But I think it adds a lot of credence when someone seemingly has nothing to gain from this and has a lot to lose.
I wonder how many other, I'm sure there's like a million, but other encounters where aliens allegedly like spoke to people like this versus just like showing up and, or being seen in the sky. Because this one also stands out for that reason. They like a message and everything.
Definitely, yeah.
I can't think of any, but I can't say I'm extremely like well-versed in UFO lore, aside from what we've discussed on the podcast. I mean, there's like abductions, but I think that's a different thing. An abduction versus aliens arriving and being like, hey, here's a message, and then leaving.
August 18th, 2009, ABC News, man claims aliens send him messages.
Yeah. I feel like it needs to be like more people.
Definitely.
Like this one.
One night in 1997, over 600 witnesses. I think this is the Phoenix Lights. But apparently a family. When were the Phoenix Lights? I'm going to double check that. But apparently a family in 1996 claimed to have been directly targeted by aliens and chosen. That was 1997. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Oh. Phoenix Lights. So it was another really big one. Over 600 people said they saw lights in the sky in a strange formation, very similar to the Lake Michigan UFO incident.
Yeah. It does make me wonder, all the lights in the sky. You know, we talked about like what ancient people thought when they saw things in the sky they couldn't explain. And a part of me wonders if like the lights in the sky thing is just some sort of natural phenomenon we don't understand yet.
It's possible. It's very possible. We still don't know what dark matter is, and that's most of the universe.
Yeah.
So.
I feel like maybe I was like naive before COVID, but I feel like one thing COVID taught me was like, oh, like we don't have all the answers for like things. Science.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. I mean, we're writing about new discoveries every day.
Every day. Yeah.
It's a lot of what we do. So
that's true.
And I mean, like, especially like I alluded to earlier, with this stuff, it's getting harder and harder to keep track of. And every day there seems to be a new video released that purportedly shows a UFO, or just the other day they held the UFO hearings where military intelligence officials were on record now saying, the U.S. has recovered non-human craft. I've seen a lot of people also angrily on X saying,
I was like, what? Oh, yeah.
Saying like, well, stop saying non-human, because that could mean that it's like a cat. And I'm like, if there are cat people out there flying discs that move in a way we don't know, that's just as exciting.
Yeah, I want to know about that. Even if it's like regular cats flying discs, I want to know about that.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. People are using that as like an example of like, well, just because it's non-human doesn't mean it's aliens. And I'm like, okay, if cats are building UFOs, like that, we should probably know about that too.
We probably should. It's a good thing to know.
One person was like, stop saying biologics. That could be a hamburger. And I was like,
what?
Again, if a hamburger is driving a car, I want to know about it. Like a regular car. It's like, it doesn't matter.
Man. Yeah. We'll see. We'll see about that stuff.
Or is it all being kept under wraps? Perhaps by a seedy government organization with a catchy theme song. Written by Will Smith. Who are we talking about? It's the Men in Black. That's right. We're talking about the Men in Black next episode.
Episode 4.
Yeah. Finale. And perhaps the reason that all of this has been kept under wraps for so long, though. Admittedly, I'm fairly skeptical about the Men in Black.
All right. Interesting. All right. Great.
I'm fairly skeptical about them.
Well, we'll get into all of that next time for our final episode in the podcast series about UFOs.
Thanks for listening.
This was episode 3. Obviously, we talk about much more than just UFOs and aliens at All That's Interesting. And you can check out all of that stuff. History, true crime, new discoveries, everything. Anything interesting. Which is the second time I made that joke today, the last 2 hours. You can go to allthat'sinteresting.com. Of course, you can sign up for our newsletter by going to allthat'sinteresting.com/sign-up or becoming a member at allthat'interesting.com/membership.
Yeah. And if you want to get in contact with us, let us know about the show, what you thought about this series in particular. If you want to share any stories of your own. You can get in contact with us at podcast@allthat'sinteresting.com or leave us a voicemail at 929-526-3029. And we'd love to hear from you.
We sure would. Yeah. In the meantime, we'll talk to you next week with the Men in Black.